On Mother's Day, my daughter gave her mother-in-law a diamond necklace worth $250,000. I got a rent bill. I smiled, nodded, and handed out the dessert like a good guest in my own daughter's house. But inside, something broke. 3 decades of sacrifice, of raising her alone after her father passed, had been reduced to a number on paper. That night, I left without a word. But I didn't leave empty-handed, because what they never knew was what I had kept hidden all these years. The waiter poured champagne into tall glasses, while the sunlight poured through the windows of the coastal dining room. White linens, soft music, silver cutlery. Harper had spared no expense booking the private room. The Mother's Day brunch, she called it. Family only. Elegant. Special. Scott raised his glass first, smiling like a man who knew how to smile in front of money. Harper beamed beside him. Their son, Liam, played with the folded napkin in his lap. I sat across the table, between two empty chairs, the third place always forgotten. When the toast ended, Harper stood up with theatrical grace, holding a small velvet box in her manicured hand. "This is for the woman who raised me like her own," she said, turning to her mother-in-law. The woman smiled, reached across the table, and opened the box with practiced delight. Inside was a necklace. Platinum. Oval-cut diamonds. The kind of piece that didn't whisper wealth. It shouted it. $250,000. I would learn the price later. At that moment, I only felt the weight of the silence around me. Everyone clapped. Photos were taken. Liam tried to stand on his chair. I handed him a spoon to distract him. Then Harper turned toward me. The smile faded just slightly. She reached into her purse and took out an envelope. Thin. White. She placed it in front of my plate like a check at the end of a meal. "This is for you, Mum," she said with a wink. I opened it slowly, my hands calm. Inside was a printout. Bold font. Rent due, $1,500. Next month. The line under it said, amount past due, $0. So this was her way of saying I wasn't late yet. Not yet. I looked up. Her expression didn't change. No blush, no flicker of doubt. She wanted me to know this wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate, polite, formal. She had turned our home into a transaction. No one else said a word. Scott reached for the bread. Liam asked for juice. The server refilled glasses. I folded the paper and placed it gently back in the envelope. Then I looked at Harper and gave her a nod. Just once. She smiled, satisfied. I smiled too. We continued with the meal. Strawberries, brioche, lobster quiche. Scott told a story about a client at his firm. Harper complimented the decor. The mother-in-law took a photo with her necklace, flashing it toward the window like it needed sunlight to prove its value. I stood up when dessert was served and walked toward the restroom. On the way, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. Hair pinned back, blouse pressed, earrings small and tasteful. I looked like someone who belonged there, but I didn't. I was a guest in my daughter's story, a character she kept in the background, tidy, quiet, convenient, and now apparently billable. I washed my hands and stared at the sink. For a second, I thought about tearing the envelope in half and dropping it in the trash, but I didn't. I dried my hands, adjusted my collar, and went back to the table. When Harper offered me coffee, I accepted. When Scott asked me about the weather, I answered. I even posed for a family photo, standing beside the woman wearing diamonds, smiling like we were sisters. I've always believed in waiting. Some things are worth it. That evening, I helped load the dishes into the dishwasher. Harper was already upstairs, scrolling her phone in bed. Scott was watching golf. Liam had fallen asleep on the couch. I folded a blanket over his legs before I went to my room. I packed only what mattered. A week's worth of clothes, my IDs, my notebook, my husband's watch, the key to the safety deposit box. It had been hidden in an old shoebox for years, but now I took it out and placed it in my wallet. I sat down to write. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't an apology or a goodbye. It was a receipt. I listed every dollar I had spent raising Harper. Tuition, shoes, medical bills, groceries. Every time I had covered a gap, paid off a credit card, bought a crib, funded a wedding. I ended the note with a total, and under the total, just one line: I am not for rent. If you're still here listening, thank you for walking with me. This story doesn't slow down from here. It only sharpens. Keep your ears open. The next part, that's where everything turns. I didn't sleep that night, not because of anger. That came later. It was something quieter at first, something like being hollowed out from the inside. I lay in the dark, listening to the soft hum of the dishwasher in the kitchen, the clink of glassware as it dried. The house had gone silent, but inside me, everything was moving. I had seen this coming. Not the necklace, not the rent bill, not exactly, but the moment, the line, the shift where love used to be and something colder took its place. And maybe that's the part that hurts most, knowing I knew and still stayed, still cooked dinner, still paid for things they thought I didn't notice. Harper used to be a different girl. She had wild curls and scraped knees and used to sneak into my bed during thunderstorms. I raised her without help. Her father died when she was 8. A heart attack, sudden and sharp. We had been preparing dinner together. He dropped the knife and then dropped with it. I held him while he died. Harper watched from the hallway, too small to speak. That night, she stopped sleeping with the lights off. I let her take up space in my bed until she didn't need it anymore. I didn't date. I didn't complain. I just got up each morning and did what needed to be done. Paid bills, packed lunches, said yes when she needed new dance shoes and no when she didn't need a new phone. When she went off to college, I dipped into the small fund my husband and I had saved. It was meant for retirement. But her dreams came first. I got a job at the school library to cover the difference. Nobody saw that part, and I never reminded her. I thought love was silent work. Now I know it was just convenient to be the one who never asked for anything. The day Harper married Scott, I wore a pale blue dress and stood in the back row during the ceremony. Her husband's parents had paid for most of the wedding, so I kept quiet. They got her a car as a gift. I bought her a rice cooker and a check for $500. It was all I could manage without touching the fund. The fund. I hadn't thought about it in a while. Not in real terms. My husband and I had set it up during the first year of our marriage, naming it Seagrass. A quiet name. A hidden thing. It was meant to be our future, untouched and growing. When he died, I couldn't bring myself to close it. So I didn't. Instead, I moved it into a private trust account under my name, invested it in a safe spread of municipal bonds and low-risk index funds. And then I left it alone, for 30 years. Occasionally I checked it, watched it grow, and never once mentioned it to Harper. She thought I had nothing. That was the game, wasn't it? Keep me dependent, manageable. A woman without resources was easy to push around. It had worked for a long time. I had played the part so well I started to believe it. That I was just the old woman in the back room. That I owed them for taking me in. That it made sense to be charged rent in a home I helped build. But the thing about silence is, it has weight. And one day, it shifts. By the time the sun rose, I had packed everything that mattered into a single overnight bag. Not much, a few clothes, the leather journal where I kept every important record, the flash drive with the trust details and documents, my husband's watch, Liam's last drawing for me, folded into my wallet. I left the note on Harper's kitchen table beside her coffee pot. She always came downstairs at 7:30 sharp. She would find it before the cream went into her cup. Then I called a car. Not a cab. A black sedan. Something that looked official. I waited on the corner, jacket zipped, bag at my feet, while the sun broke across the sky. It was a quiet morning, fresh, like the kind of air you breathe the day after a storm. The driver asked where I was headed. I gave him the address of the bank first. I had an appointment with the manager to update access on the trust account. I hadn't seen that man in over a decade, but when I walked in, he rose to greet me like I was royalty. "Mrs. Whitford, we've been keeping Seagrass in good shape for you." Yes, they had. After that, I asked to speak with the bank's legal department. Then I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. His name was Thomas Ellery, my husband's oldest friend. He was a retired estate attorney with hands that trembled and a mind that didn't. He picked up on the third ring, said he was surprised. I said I needed help. He didn't ask why. He just said, "I've got coffee on. Come now." So I did. The moment I sat in his kitchen and laid out the documents on the table, something in me settled. I was done being quiet. Thomas and I sat across from each other in his small kitchen. The place still smelled like the lemon wood polish his wife used before she passed. He had a chipped mug in one hand and a pen in the other, scribbling notes beside a stack of printed documents I had carried in a manila folder. He didn't speak for a while, just reviewed page after page. Every so often he'd let out a low grunt or tap the table twice, the way he used to when reading depositions back in the day. When he finally looked up, there wasn't surprise in his face, just quiet disappointment. "So they turned on you," he said. I nodded. I didn't need to explain the rest. He had seen enough mothers get blindsided by their own children to know how the story usually went. The difference here was I had not come empty-handed. We spent most of that morning drafting 3 documents. The first was an amendment to the Seagrass Trust, tightening my control and adding a legal clause that would protect the fund in case Harper or Scott ever attempted to contest it. The second was a declaration of financial independence, clarifying that I had never been a financial dependent in their household. The third was a revocation of shared account access, effective immediately. I signed all 3. Thomas would file them by noon. There was no drama in that moment, no swelling music, just ink on paper and the steady sound of a man who had been in too many battles to flinch anymore. He told me to keep copies of everything on my person, and to give one to my bank, one to his firm, and one to someone I trusted. That last part made me pause. Trusted. I didn't have a long list, but I knew someone who still knew what loyalty looked like. Her name was Angela Ruiz. We taught at the same high school for 20 years. She ran the English department. I handled the history courses. Angela was fierce in ways I never could be. Bold, loud, political. I was always quieter, more measured. But we had understood each other. She retired 2 years before I did and moved into a smaller place on the other side of town. We hadn't spoken in nearly a year, but I remembered she always picked up if you called before noon. So I did. She told me to come over. No questions, just that. Angela lived in a small condo that smelled like fresh laundry and cinnamon tea. Her walls were covered in family photos, newspaper clippings and machines, and framed student letters. She didn't ask why I looked the way I did, or why my hands shook a little when I handed her the envelope. She read everything, front to back, in silence. When she finished, she looked up at me with eyes that hadn't softened a bit with age. "About time," she said. And that was that. We sat in her living room for an hour, not talking about the papers. She asked about my knees, my garden, whether Liam was still reading chapter books. We didn't touch the sore part of my story, but I could feel her listening anyway. It helped, more than I expected. Before I left, she stood at the door, resting a hand on my shoulder. "If you need someone to witness what's coming, I'll be there." I didn't cry, but the weight in my chest loosened just enough for me to breathe easier. I stayed at a motel that night. Clean enough. Quiet. I didn't sleep much, but I wasn't restless either. I spent the hours reading through old journals, updating entries, organizing files. It was the kind of busy work that calms the nerves without giving too much space for sorrow. By morning, I had a plan. The first stop was the downtown post office. I mailed one copy of the legal documents to Thomas, one to Angela, and kept one in a sealed envelope inside the lining of my bag. Then I walked 2 blocks to a print shop and had a large poster board made. White background. 2 images, a copy of the rent bill Harper gave me on Mother's Day, and a photo of the necklace she gave her mother-in-law. Between the 2 images, I printed one sentence in bold letters. "This is what love looks like in my daughter's house." It wasn't revenge, not yet, but it was clarity. The next thing I did was walk into the Lakefield Event Center and ask to speak to the front desk coordinator. The woman was polite. She assumed I was asking about a party. I asked instead if she had the guest list for the upcoming leadership gala, where Scott was scheduled to be recognized. She hesitated. I told her I used to work in public education and was invited as an alumna by one of the donors. She didn't press. She checked the list and confirmed that Scott and Harper were among the honorees. I asked if I could buy a single guest ticket. She looked unsure, but I placed 5 crisp bills on the counter. She nodded, wrote my name down, and handed me an envelope. 2 days. That's all the time I had. I spent those 2 days preparing, but not with rage. I wasn't interested in tantrums. I was interested in something that stuck. Something that made people see the truth I had been carrying like a shadow. The day of the gala, I dressed in navy blue. Simple, but clean. I wore a pair of heels I hadn't touched in years. They pinched, but I didn't mind. I pinned my hair back and wore my husband's watch. Not as jewelry, as reminder. I arrived 5 minutes before the event started. Angela was already there, waiting in the far corner of the lobby, sipping sparkling water. She raised her glass to me without a word. I walked in slowly, sat near the back, waited for my moment. And when it came, I didn't hesitate. I stood. I walked forward. And I carried the truth with me. Not in my voice, but in my hands. 2 days was not much time, but when you have nothing left to lose, you move differently. My steps were quicker, my mind sharper. I had no room for second guessing. Everything I needed to know had already been revealed. They had shown me who they were. Now it was my turn to show them who I had always been. The morning after I purchased the ticket to the gala, I went straight to the courthouse. Not to file anything just yet, but to meet a young woman named Rachel Dean. Thomas had connected me to her. She worked in estate litigation, a new name in legal circles, but with a reputation for getting results without noise. She greeted me with a calm nod and a legal pad in hand. We met in a small corner of a coffee shop across from the clerk's office. I explained the situation clearly and simply. The trust, the unauthorized withdrawals, the printed rent bill, the pattern of financial manipulation. I slid over the folder Thomas and I had prepared. Rachel read through the pages like someone used to passing through deception, and when she was done, she gave a single nod. "I can work with this," she said. She outlined a preliminary plan. First, we'd issue a formal revocation of shared financial authority on all co-owned accounts. That would trigger an immediate freeze and require bank authentication for any future withdrawals. Second, she would send a formal notice of intent to investigate financial elder abuse directed to both Harper and Scott. It wouldn't be public yet, but it would make them nervous. That was the point. Pressure revealed character. While Rachel began drafting paperwork, I returned to the bank to initiate a title request. Harper and Scott had persuaded me 2 years ago to co-sign on a line of credit for home renovations. They said it was just a formality, that I wouldn't be responsible for anything, that the house would stay in their name. They had lied. What I discovered from the bank officer left no room for confusion. My name was listed not as guarantor, but as joint title holder. Worse, I had unknowingly signed a clause allowing them to borrow against the property value using my portion of equity as collateral. I had signed it during a family cookout, back when Scott had slid documents across the table with a glass of iced tea. Just a quick signature, he had said. Nothing binding. Harper had smiled. I remembered that moment now. The casual deception, the way they had made me feel silly for asking questions. And I remembered what followed weeks later, when I started noticing things. An outdoor kitchen that wasn't budgeted for, a second car parked in their driveway. I should have asked more. I should have demanded to see the paperwork. But guilt is a quiet trap. It tells you to sit down, to stay agreeable, to be grateful. Not anymore. With Thomas's guidance, I began the process of purchasing their remaining mortgage debt. It wasn't complicated. Their credit had slipped in the last year, and the bank was eager to offload risky loans. With money from Seagrass, I placed an anonymous offer through a secondary lender. Within hours, I was the holder of the note on their house. It wasn't revenge, it was leverage. By the next morning, everything was in motion. Rachel had overnighted the notices to their residents, signature required. The bank had frozen the joint accounts. The title reassignment request had been logged. And I had prepared one final thing. A letter. Handwritten. Not to them, but to Liam. It was short. I told him I was okay, that sometimes adults had to do hard things to protect themselves, that he was loved, and none of what was happening had anything to do with him. I sealed the envelope and left it with Angela, along with instructions to deliver it only if necessary. I had not heard from Harper. No missed calls, no texts, no attempt to find me. She was either pretending nothing happened or waiting for the storm to pass. Either way, she was about to learn that the clouds were already overhead. The night before the gala, I laid everything out on the motel bed. The poster board with the necklace and rent bill, copies of the documents, a summary sheet Rachel had drafted, outlining the financial inconsistencies and the estimated damages. I rehearsed what I would say, not to shame them, but to tell the truth clearly, with facts and a calm voice. Angela called to check in. She would arrive early, take photos, and blend into the background. Her presence gave me courage, not because I needed backup, but because it reminded me I was not invisible anymore. Someone saw what was happening and stood beside me. The morning of the event, I ironed my navy dress and packed everything carefully into a zippered folder. I left the motel room spotless and checked out with quiet relief. I was done hiding. At the Lakefield Event Center, the parking lot was already full. A valet in a tuxedo opened my door and offered an arm. I declined. I had carried myself through worse. I could walk into this, too. Inside, the lobby was golden with chandelier light. People moved in clusters, wine glasses in hand, name tags flashing. Scott stood near the front, surrounded by colleagues. Harper was at his side, laughing too loud. She wore a silver dress and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I stood by the entrance for a moment, watching. No one noticed me. Not yet. But they would. And when they did, it would be on my terms. Not with shouting, not with drama, just the truth, standing steady in the room they tried to keep me out of. The stage was set, and I was ready. They called his name just before the champagne arrived, Scott Whitford, recipient of the Lakefield Civic Leadership Award. The room applauded. Polite, generous, most didn't know him. They were clapping out of habit. Harper leaned over and kissed his cheek as he stood. She smoothed his lapel like a campaign manager prepping a candidate. He smiled, nodded to the audience, and walked toward the podium with that slow, rehearsed confidence he had always carried. I waited until he adjusted the microphone, waited until the room quieted. Then I stood, not fast, not angry, just steady. I walked forward, folder in one hand, poster board in the other. I did not ask permission. I did not pause to explain. I stepped onto the stage from the side aisle and stood beside him. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Scott looked at me. Recognition flickered in his eyes. A flicker, then dread. Harper stood from her seat, her mouth forming a word without sound. She didn't move to stop me. She couldn't. No one knew what to do, which was exactly the advantage I needed. I turned toward the audience and held up the board. On one side, a printed photo of the necklace, diamond, platinum, impossible to ignore. On the other, a scanned copy of the rent bill. I spoke into the microphone. My name is Lorraine Whitford. I am Scott's mother-in-law. I was invited tonight as a guest. But I'm here as something else. I'm here as a warning. There were no gasps, just silence. I raised the board higher. 2 weeks ago, on Mother's Day, my daughter gave this necklace to her mother-in-law. $250,000, gift-wrapped, public, celebrated. And on the same day, she gave me this. I tapped the rent bill, loud enough to echo, a formal invoice. $1,500 a month to continue living in the house where I raised her, where I paid for groceries, where I watched her son while she worked late, where I paid the water bill every third month out of habit because I had been conditioned to give. Still, the room stayed silent. No defense, no reaction, no interruption. So I continued. I am not destitute. That was their mistake, assuming silence meant weakness. But silence can be a strategy. It gave me time to act, to gather evidence, to document withdrawals from shared accounts, to uncover property deeds with forged authorization, to track every cent moved behind my back. I turned to face Scott directly. And it gave me time to buy your mortgage. He blinked. You signed your name on the paperwork, but the loan was restructured and sold. The institution that bought it belongs to a trust under my name. As of yesterday, I own the rights to your debt. A few heads turned toward Harper now. One man near the side wall pulled out his phone, checking something, maybe rereading the announcement email. Names, affiliations, connections. Harper sat frozen, her hands flat on the table. Her silver dress gleamed like foil beneath the chandeliers, but her face had gone pale. The truth is simple, I said, turning back to the crowd. You cannot betray someone who has nothing to lose. But when the person you dismiss has the power to take back what was stolen, you will learn. And tonight is the first lesson. I stepped down without looking at Scott again. I left the poster leaning against the podium. The silence stretched behind me, thick and stunned. Angela met me at the edge of the room and handed me a glass of water. Nobody followed me. Not at first. By the time I reached the lobby, whispers had begun. Names, questions. A man from the business journal tried to approach me, but Angela blocked him with a single shake of her head. We stepped outside into the humid night. The sky had started to bruise with summer clouds. Somewhere behind the trees, thunder rolled, far off but getting closer. Angela drove. I sat quietly in the passenger seat, hands folded. I did not feel triumphant. I felt awake. Back at her condo, she poured tea without a word. We sat in the kitchen like two retired teachers at a department meeting, calm, observant, knowing exactly how the story would unfold from here. The next morning, I checked my email. Rachel had already sent over a scanned copy of the official foreclosure notice. It would be delivered to Harper and Scott within 48 hours, unless full repayment was arranged. I did not feel guilty. Later that afternoon, David Morgan, the former student turned journalist, called. He had heard whispers and had tracked down the story. He asked if I wanted to speak on record. I declined. Let the facts speak. Let the silence do its work. That evening, as the sun lowered over Angela's small garden, I sat on the porch and watched a sparrow land on the feeder. I thought of Liam, of his soft voice and steady hands when he coloured. I remembered the card he made me last year, the one that said I was his favourite person, drawn with shaky block letters and hearts too big to fit. I would not let this turn me bitter, but I would let it mark the line. This was the night everything changed. And it wasn't over yet. It took less than 24 hours for the first fracture to show. Harper called the bank the next morning, demanding answers about the mortgage. She was told, politely but firmly, that the debt had been sold to a private trust, and that all communications moving forward must go through the new note holder. They did not tell her the name of that trust. She didn't need them to. She already knew. Later that day, Rachel forwarded a copy of the notice Harper had received at home. The subject line was simple: formal notification of foreclosure proceedings. The packet included a breakdown of the mortgage terms, the missed escrow payments from the past 6 months, and a final demand for repayment in full. If unmet, the property would be subject to public auction. By evening, my phone began to buzz. I didn't answer. Not Harper's number, not Scott's, not the unknown local ones either. I had no intention of speaking until there was nothing left for them to twist. Angela was the one who answered her door the next morning when Harper showed up, red-eyed and dressed like she had slept in her clothes. I stayed in the guest room. I could hear the low conversation through the thin wall, Angela's voice calm and measured, Harper's rising and falling in uneven bursts. Eventually, the front door opened again, closed again. Angela returned to the kitchen and set down 2 mugs. She looked at me. "She's scared now," she said. "Good." But fear wasn't what I wanted. Not for her. What I wanted was reckoning. That afternoon, David's article went live. He had titled it without flair, "Former Teacher Exposes Financial Abuse from Within Her Own Family." The story spread quickly, picked up by the local affiliate, and then pushed into syndication. It wasn't the kind of piece that trended, but it was the kind that stayed in people's minds. Quiet, haunting, true. David had stuck to the facts, the rent bill, the shared accounts, the forgery on the second mortgage document. He quoted Rachel as a legal expert and Thomas as a character witness. He mentioned my 40 years in public education and my volunteer work in literacy programs. He let the contrast speak for itself. What kind of daughter tries to evict the mother who raised her? Within hours, Harper's inbox was flooded. The board where she worked released a statement saying they were reviewing the situation internally. Scott's firm quietly removed his name from the website. By sundown, they had both gone completely silent online. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. I made dinner with Angela, peeled carrots, listened to a jazz record she played on a dusty old speaker. We ate in silence. The air outside had shifted. Storms were moving in. Around 10 that night, my phone rang again. This time, it was a number I recognized. David. I picked up. He spoke carefully. A woman had contacted him that afternoon, said her name was Celia, that she used to work with Harper on a community housing committee, said she had information. I told David to listen, but not to act. Not yet. The next morning, Celia called Rachel directly. I sat beside her at the law office, listening to the speakerphone. Celia's voice was steady, but tired. She told us that Harper had used my name not just on the second mortgage, but also to co-sign a small business loan 3 years earlier. That loan had gone into default. She had proof. Copies of the paperwork, emails, a text exchange where Harper joked about having a signature no one would question. Rachel asked her to send everything. She did. The moment I saw the signature, I knew it wasn't mine. It was close enough to pass. But the loops were too sharp, the pressure uneven. Harper used to mimic my handwriting when she was younger. It used to make me laugh. Not now. Rachel leaned back and exhaled. This was no longer just about real estate. It was fraud, identity misuse, possibly even wire fraud, depending on how the funds were processed. She told me she would prepare a report and send it to the state attorney's office by the end of the week. I nodded, not out of satisfaction, out of inevitability. Later that day, I took a walk around Angela's block. Just me and the wind, a grey sky pressing down. My knees ached, my ankles were swollen, but I walked anyway. I thought about the years I spent absorbing everything, the comments, the small exclusions, the dismissive tones, the empty holidays. How many women like me were doing the same thing every day, in silence? I had never wanted to be seen like this. But now that I was, I understood the power of visibility. Back at the house, Rachel called again. There was more. Celia had remembered something else. A file. A reimbursement request Harper had filed on behalf of the committee. The expense wasn't outrageous, but the receipt attached was mine. My actual handwriting. A scanned copy of a grocery list I had made years ago, cut and repurposed to justify a $400 claim. Rachel was quiet after sharing that detail. So was I. This was no longer emotional betrayal. This was criminal pattern. I stood at the kitchen counter and made a cup of tea with Angela watching me. "This will get worse before it gets better," I said. Angela didn't blink. Let it. The wind outside picked up, the kind that snapped branches and rattled fences. I looked out the window and saw the neighbor's flag twisting in circles. I wasn't just in a storm now. I had become it. And I wasn't done. Not yet. 3 days passed like water under ice. Still, but tense. I moved quietly through Angela's home, almost like a guest in a museum, each step soft, each sound deliberate. I answered no calls. I read no emails. Every morning, Rachel updated me by phone, her voice calm but tighter each day. Every night, Angela made a pot of tea, the same cinnamon-spiced blend I used to serve during autumn parent conferences. But the quiet didn't mean nothing was happening. Quite the opposite. The state attorney's office had acknowledged receipt of Rachel's file. Fraud, forgery, falsified loan documents, misuse of identity, possible abuse of power within a non-profit advisory role. Celia's testimony was being evaluated. Thomas, who had returned from his cabin in Idaho, submitted a signed affidavit verifying the moment he saw Harper forge my signature back in June. David had already shared all correspondence with his editors, and they had connected it with other patterns in similar family exploitation stories. I wasn't the first mother to be betrayed by her child, but I would not go down as just another forgotten one. Then the official subpoena arrived, not to me, to Harper. Angela brought the mail in around 11 a.m. that Wednesday. She set the thick envelope on the counter, looked at it, then slid it to me. I didn't touch it. I didn't have to. That afternoon, Scott called Angela's landline. Angela picked it up, listened, then handed me the phone without a word. He spoke low, like a man used to closing deals behind closed doors. He wanted to meet. He said Harper had lost her job, that their savings were frozen, that their legal team was considering filing something about undue pressure or slander. He asked if we could sit down and talk this through. His voice never broke, but mine did. Not loudly, not with anger, just quiet, cold, final. I told him there was nothing left to discuss. I told him he could tell Harper to stop pretending the damage was an accident. Then I hung up. Angela stood at the stove, her back to me. She didn't say a word. Later that day, Rachel called again. A formal civil complaint had been filed, on my behalf. She was moving forward with a restraining order, not just to protect me, but to prevent Harper from transferring or liquidating any shared assets until the court ruled on the fraud claims. That included the house, the investment accounts Harper had opened using my old banking information, and even the shared checking account she hadn't closed. By Thursday morning, everything was beginning to unravel for them. Angela and I sat by the window drinking tea, watching as dark clouds formed over the hills. I felt no joy. I felt nothing at all, really. Just a strange clarity, like cold light hitting a dirty mirror. That evening, someone knocked. It was Rachel. She had come in person, holding a printed document in her hands, her briefcase slung low at her side. She sat across from me and unfolded the paper. It was another notarized statement, but not from a witness. It was from my late husband's former accountant. He had been the one who helped my husband draw up our joint retirement plan back in the early 2000s. He had records, investment distributions, handwritten instructions my husband left for how and when the funds should be released. Rachel had reached out on a hunch, and he had responded immediately. The document revealed something I hadn't known. Before passing, my husband had authorized a final transfer into a trust fund, intended solely for me, under the condition that it remain untouched unless I personally signed for it. The amount was larger than I expected. $3.2 million. Rachel looked me in the eye. "They've been trying to bleed you dry," she said, "but they didn't know this existed. It was buried deep. He must have done it in secret. Maybe he saw something coming." I sat back in the chair, my palms flat on my lap, not shaking, not frozen, just still. It was the first time in weeks I had felt anything close to safe. That night, I didn't sleep. I walked the hallway from guest room to living room, pausing by the old bookshelf where Angela kept family photos and dusty novels. I thought about the choices my husband made. Quiet choices. Protective ones. The kind no one noticed until the crisis came. Maybe he had seen the way Harper shifted her tone when she was cornered. Maybe he had seen the way Scott tightened his grip on conversations, always insisting on silence, on deference. Maybe he just knew the same thing I was learning now. Trust should never be blind, not even to family. The next morning, I began to write. Not for the lawyers, not for the media, for myself. A letter, to Harper, not to forgive, but to tell her that I was finished letting her live in my shadow while dragging my name through the dirt. That whatever stories she had told herself to justify using me as a stepping stone would collapse now. That the woman she tried to silence was the one who raised her to speak in the first place. And I ended that letter with one line: "You mistook my kindness for weakness. You won't do it again." I folded the page, set it aside. Then I called Rachel. I told her I was ready for court. Because this wasn't just about getting my money back. It was about getting myself back. My name, my voice, my place in the world I had helped build. The storm hadn't ended, but now I was the one walking straight into it, not hiding, not flinching, not anymore. The courthouse sat quiet beneath a sheet of grey sky, as if even the weather understood the weight of what was about to unfold inside. I arrived early. Angela insisted on driving me, though she barely said a word the whole way there. Her hand gripped the wheel like she was holding back 1,000 things she didn't want to speak into existence. Rachel was already waiting at the entrance, her briefcase in one hand, a manila folder in the other. She greeted me with a nod, not a smile, and I appreciated that. No false cheer. No unnecessary pep talk. Just presence, steady and sharp. Inside the building, everything smelled like old paper and coffee burned 2 hours too long. A security guard waved us through. Rachel led me toward the courtroom, her heels clicking across the tile like a metronome counting down to something irreversible. We didn't sit with the public. She guided me to a small conference room off to the side. There, on the table, were printouts, charts, photos, a timeline of transactions, a copy of the trust documents, my signature from the falsified rental agreement, and the real one I had signed a year before. Beside that, a copy of the letter I wrote Harper. Rachel had included it as a statement of impact. I hadn't expected that. Minutes later, the opposing team entered. Harper wasn't with them yet, but Scott was. He looked thinner, paler. His usual confidence was dulled, like a blade worn down from too many reckless cuts. He nodded at me, tight-lipped. I did not return the gesture. Harper arrived exactly on time. Hair perfectly styled, clothes just formal enough to look composed but not desperate. She didn't glance at me, didn't even scan the room. She kept her eyes on her lawyer and never once acknowledged I was sitting less than 15 feet away. It was a bench trial, no jury, just the judge, our statements, and the weight of evidence. Rachel opened with clarity, moving through the timeline of events with precision. She didn't embellish. She didn't dramatize. She laid out the financials, the forged signatures, the misuse of power. She introduced testimony from Thomas, from Celia, even a recorded conversation Harper had once left on a voicemail by accident. In it, she had spoken to someone about transferring funds from one account to another, using my name as a formality. Then Rachel placed the trust documents on the table, and everything shifted. The judge leaned forward. Harper's attorney whispered in her ear. Harper stiffened. Scott sat frozen, his eyes fixed on the floor. Rachel explained that this trust had been sealed, protected under my husband's final instructions, that no one but me had legal access to the funds, that Harper had tried, unsuccessfully, to gain access 3 months prior under the guise of power of attorney, which she did not have. Rachel didn't have to raise her voice. The facts shouted for themselves. Then came Harper's turn. Her lawyer attempted to reframe everything as a misunderstanding, miscommunication, a stressed daughter under pressure. The lawyer tried to cast doubt on my memory, gently at first, then more directly, suggesting that age may have caused confusion, that some of the claims were rooted in interpretation and not intent. But the evidence didn't waver. When Harper took the stand, she finally looked at me. not with remorse, not even with anger, with fear. She tried to explain away the signatures, said she thought I had agreed, that we had talked about it. She said she only wanted to manage the properties because I seemed overwhelmed. She never once admitted the truth. The judge interrupted her twice, asked her to clarify timelines, asked why she had transferred money from an account listed under my personal trust if she believed she had my consent. She faltered, stammered. Rachel stood to object, then sat again. It didn't matter. Harper had already tripped over herself. By the time the afternoon closed in, the judge was ready to make an initial ruling. A full verdict would take a week, but the judge issued a temporary injunction. Harper was barred from accessing any of my accounts, properties, or assets until further notice. A criminal investigation into the forgery was formally launched. Then the judge looked at me. She asked if I had anything I wanted to say on the record. I stood. My legs felt like stone, but I didn't shake. I spoke with the same quiet I had used when raising Harper, when soothing her cries after scraped knees, when whispering lullabies through sick nights. That quiet had always been my strength. And now, it was my weapon. I said only this. I trusted someone who used my love as a tool, who took what wasn't hers not out of need, but out of entitlement. I came here today not because I wanted revenge, but because I deserved the dignity she tried to strip away. I'm here to say I remember. I know what she did, and I will no longer carry the weight of her silence. Then I sat down. No one clapped. No one sighed. The room just held its breath. After the session ended, Rachel and I walked slowly back toward the exit. Angela was waiting outside, standing beneath a tree with gold leaves fluttering around her feet. She looked up when she saw me, and for the first time in weeks, she smiled. Not a wide smile, not a joyful one, a small, knowing one, like something broken had finally clicked into place. We didn't speak until we got in the car. Angela started the engine. "So," she said, "what now?" I leaned back against the seat. "Now," I said, "I breathe, then I build," and we drove away. Not into freedom, not into fantasy, into a life I was finally choosing for myself. Without apology, without shame, just quiet, just clarity, and maybe, in time, peace. The letter arrived 2 days after the hearing, not from Harper, not from any lawyer. It came from Scott. A simple envelope, handwritten, no return address. Inside was an invitation, a dinner, at their home, not a celebration, not even an apology. Just a line that read, "Let's talk. We owe you that much." I stared at it for a long time before folding it back up. My first instinct was to burn it. Let the ashes blow through the garden and be done with them all. But something about the silence that followed the trial, the stillness in their camp, told me this dinner wasn't just about saving face. It was about control, and I needed to see what they still thought they held. Angela offered to go with me. I told her no. This was mine to finish. I wore grey, neutral, unbothered. I pinned my hair up, slipped on the same modest shoes I had worn to the courtroom, and walked into that house like I had never been erased from it. Everything looked the same. The dining table with its lacquered edges, the art on the wall Harper had picked out from some boutique in Santa Fe, the way the light cast long shadows in the entryway, like the house itself was still trying to decide whether I belonged in it. Scott greeted me at the door. His face was tight, the kind of forced politeness that tastes like metal on the tongue. He offered a drink. I declined. Harper stood by the fireplace, arms folded, watching me like I might steal the doorknobs on my way out. We sat at the table, No music, no candles, just silence and the low hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Scott cleared his throat, thanked me for coming. Harper stayed quiet. He began talking about misunderstandings, about stress, about how complicated things had gotten, and how nobody meant for this to spiral. He said the trial had opened their eyes to how distant things had become, that perhaps, somewhere along the way, everyone got caught up in legal language and forgot about family. I didn't speak. Harper shifted in her chair. Then, without looking up, she said she had spoken to her attorney, that they intended to withdraw the petition they had filed to challenge the trust, that they respected my boundaries and would no longer seek access to any financial matter tied to my name. She said it like a deal being closed, like a business decision. No regret, no warmth. Scott added that they were considering relocating, downsizing, perhaps, something smaller, more manageable. I nodded slowly. Then I pulled out the small folder I had brought. Inside was a printed notice, a formal transfer of ownership, of the lake cabin, of the vintage car Harper had tried to gift to Brandon under my name, of the apartment I had inherited from my sister in Georgia, which they had secretly rented out through an LLC Harper had created using my tax ID. I placed the papers on the table. "You will sign these," I said, "tonight, in front of a notary, who is parked in your driveway right now." Scott's mouth opened, closed. Harper's jaw locked. "This is not revenge," I said. "This is math. You took. I take back." Harper stood up, walked around the table, her heels tapped like small warning signs. She asked what I wanted. I looked at her. "I want my name back," I said. "I want the years you stole when you made me question whether I had imagined it all. I want the respect you buried under convenience and manipulation. I want you to feel, for once, how it is to have someone hold your future in the palm of their hand." Scott whispered that they needed time, that this was a lot. I told him they had 1 hour. Then I would file a motion for criminal restitution. Then I would file the public complaint against their real estate practices, because I knew which clients Harper had borrowed funds from. I had the names, I had the contracts. I said nothing more. I stood, walked into the kitchen, made myself a cup of tea like I used to when this was still my house. Let them sit in the quiet. An hour later, the notary walked in. She wore jeans, polished boots, carried a leather folder. They signed. Not because they understood, because they were afraid. After the notary left, I stood at the threshold of that house, the same spot I had stood the night Harper told me the guest room was no longer mine, that I should find somewhere better suited for someone my age. She followed me to the door, said she hoped this meant we could begin again, that families heal. I turned to her. "Healing begins when the harm stops," I said. "You haven't even admitted what you did. You just reacted when the power shifted. This was never about family. This was about control. And now you don't have it anymore." I walked to the car, sat inside, let my fingers shake just once before I started the engine. On the way home, I passed the bakery I used to take Harper to when she was little. They still had the same sign out front, still painted in fading blue letters, still open. I pulled over, bought a loaf of sourdough and a small tart, drove the rest of the way with the windows down. That night, I slept without waking. For the first time in years, I didn't dream of silence or stairs or empty rooms. I dreamed of water, of something clean, of something that flowed forward without asking permission. I thought silence would follow the dinner, like dust settling after a long storm. I thought Harper and Scott would disappear into the background, quietly nursing their bruised pride, quietly adjusting to life without access to my savings, my properties, my patience. But control has a long echo. They didn't challenge the signatures. They didn't speak to the press. They didn't retaliate with lawyers or cryptic threats. No. Instead, they began again with something far more toxic. They started whispering. At first it was subtle. A former neighbor from my old street mentioned that Harper had stopped by with cupcakes, chatting cheerfully, saying how concerned they were about me, that I had become reclusive, maybe not thinking clearly since the whole inheritance blow-up. Another told me that Scott had been attending local real estate functions again, always with that same bittersweet smile, explaining how they had made sacrifices out of love. But sometimes parents get manipulated late in life and make rash decisions. They were rewriting the narrative. I expected it. I even prepared for it. I had already spoken to Angela and to a few other people in our community who mattered. I didn't need to control every conversation, but it stung all the same, because they weren't after money anymore. They were after my credibility. It was no longer about bank accounts. It was about the story people would tell after I was gone, and that I couldn't ignore. So I responded, not with lawsuits or press conferences. I responded with action. It started with the interview. A local podcast, hosted by a woman named Kaylin, who ran a series called Women After 60. She invited me after Angela passed along my name. She wanted stories of women who had rebuilt their lives after betrayal, who had found agency where others tried to erase them. She didn't want scandal. She wanted truth. We sat in a small studio with soft chairs and too many cables. She asked questions gently. I answered plainly. I didn't name Harper. I didn't describe courtrooms or documents. I spoke of dignity, of how power is often taken in small, quiet ways, how it's not always the shouting that leaves the deepest scars. Sometimes it's the moments you're left out of the photo, or the document, or the room. The episode aired the following week. By the end of that month, 2 women came up to me at the market to thank me. One had just reclaimed her house from a son who had tricked her into transferring it. The other had started the process of creating a trust that couldn't be contested. They said they didn't know they were allowed to fight back. That was the moment it shifted for me. This wasn't just about my story. It was about the ripple it left behind. So I started writing. Not a memoir. I didn't need to chronicle every betrayal. I wrote small essays, short reflections. I joined a monthly women's circle hosted at the community library. I mentored a young woman, Cassandra, who had been raised by her grandmother and now worked as a paralegal. She told me, with misty eyes, that too many of the cases she saw were older women being coerced by relatives who smiled for the camera, but controlled everything behind it. I wasn't trying to become an activist. I just refused to be silent again. Meanwhile, Harper kept her distance. For a while. Then came the call. Blocked number, her voice tight. She asked if we could meet. I asked what for. She said she just wanted to talk. No lawyers, no documents, just mother and daughter. I agreed, but I chose the place. A small public garden, just off the highway. No cameras, no memories attached. She arrived in beige, always trying to look calm, collected. Her eyes were tired. She sat on the bench beside me, stiff, like she thought I might slap her with my purse. She said she had seen the podcast, that some people had called her, asking what I was talking about, that it was embarrassing. I told her embarrassment is a luxury. Try shame. Try erasure. She didn't respond. She said she wasn't proud of what she did, but that she had felt cornered, pressured, that Scott had pushed things further than she wanted, that Brandon needed the car, that she thought I would forgive. I always forgave. That was the line that broke the air in half. I stood up, looked at her with everything I hadn't said in years. You didn't need forgiveness, I said. You needed consequences. And now you've had them. She started to cry. It didn't shake me. She asked if I hated her. I didn't answer, because hate was too small a word, too hot, too quick. What I felt was colder, heavier. It was disappointment sealed in concrete. It was trust, buried beneath years of excuses. It was love, forced to adapt into something that looked like distance and sounded like silence. I left her there, on the bench, with the wind and her tears and the space between us. That night, I baked bread. Angela came over for dinner. We ate quietly, talked about books, watched the news, laughed at a segment where a dog stole a pizza from a picnic table. And for the first time in a long while, I felt steady. Not victorious, not angry, just steady. And I knew that was enough. It was a week after that garden meeting with Harper that I received the official envelope, stamped, delivered by courier. No return address, but the seal on the flap was enough. I didn't open it right away. I knew what it was. A final attempt to bend the air around me back in her favor. I brewed coffee, toasted a slice of the sourdough I had made the night before. I let the envelope sit beside me like an unwelcome guest. Then, quietly, I sliced it open. Inside was a notarized letter. Harper had retained new counsel and requested a mediation process, not to reverse anything, but to reach clarity and reconciliation for the emotional benefit of all parties. It was a trap dressed in sentiment. Mediation would have given her access again, to my time, to my decisions, to the private parts of my mind she no longer had keys to. It would have looked respectable, reasonable, civilized. It would have painted me, the mother, as the one unwilling to mend. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't write a letter. I walked 3 blocks to the post office and sent the document back with one sentence scribbled beneath her printed request. Everything is already clear. There's nothing left to mediate. That was the last time Harper tried to take anything from me directly, but I knew something was still simmering. Scott had been quiet. Too quiet. Men like him don't sit in silence unless they're loading the next stone into a slingshot. Angela warned me that they were shopping for a new accountant, that Scott had been asking questions in the community about the date I had opened my charitable trust, about the legality of the amendment to my estate plan. It didn't scare me. Everything I had done was clean, protected. I had moved early, signed with full capacity, with witnesses and proof. But it told me one thing. They weren't done trying to win. Not in court. In perception. So I did the one thing they couldn't mimic. I kept living. Angela and I organized a small event at the community center, an informal talk titled Planning with Dignity. I shared a bit of my story. Not names, just facts. I explained how estate tools aren't only for the wealthy. How women should never delay thinking about control until someone else decides for them. There were 12 women in the room, some younger, most older. One cried softly in the back. Afterward, 3 of them stayed behind to ask how to get started. That evening, I took the long way home, walked past the house where Brandon had once played catch in the yard, past the tree Harper and I had planted when we first moved in after my husband died. It had grown tall, strong. Its shadow no longer touched the gate. Something inside me settled. Later that week, Cassandra, my young paralegal friend, invited me to a private dinner hosted by a women's leadership nonprofit. I didn't expect much. I thought I would listen, smile, support. I hadn't worn anything fancy in years. But when I arrived, they handed me a name tag with a small gold sticker in the corner. I asked what it meant. The coordinator smiled and said, quietly, honoree. They gave me an award that night. Not for money, not for legal action, for quiet courage, for standing in truth without noise. I didn't cry during the ceremony. I cried later, alone, in the kitchen, holding the small glass plaque with shaking hands. Because for all the rage and bitterness that had followed me for so long, I had never once thought of myself as brave. Just tired, just angry, just surviving. But maybe survival is its own kind of bravery, especially when you survive with your voice intact, especially when they tried so hard to erase it. Back at home, I placed the award not on a shelf, but on the dining table, where the sun hit it first thing each morning, just beside the napkin holder, just where I could glance at it while sipping my tea. And for once, I allowed myself the smallest, simplest kind of victory. Not revenge, not triumph. Peace. The kind that doesn't beg to be seen. The kind that just is. The last time I saw Harper was 5 months ago, in the lobby of the bank we once shared. I had just finished updating the paperwork for my trust, transferring the final piece of property, an old lakeside parcel I had forgotten we even owned. It had been left untouched for years, hidden beneath piles of dead branches and frost-burnt memories. Now it belonged to the foundation, the same one Harper once tried to dismantle. She walked in as I was slipping my ID back into my wallet. Her expression twisted just slightly when our eyes met. Not hatred, not regret. Recognition. We didn't speak. I nodded once. She didn't return it. She turned and walked to the teller. I walked out into the cold. Since then, silence has been our agreement. No more letters, no more lawyers, no more apologies stretched too thin to carry their own weight. Brandon hasn't called. He must have figured out, somewhere in the fallout, that it was safer not to. Angela sends me updates, but I don't ask for them. I don't need to know who's suing who now, or what assets they've tried and failed to liquidate. Their house is gone. Their business is frozen. The car they flaunted last Christmas was repossessed 3 weeks after I pulled my final funding from their accounts. I didn't destroy them. They did that themselves. I just stopped pretending to be the rope that held them together. The morning after the award dinner, I bought a simple wooden bench and placed it in the front yard. Not because I expected visitors, but because I wanted a place to sit where I could look at the world without having to explain myself to it. I sit there most afternoons now, tea in hand, blanket over my knees, neighbours wave. Some stop to chat. A few ask about the little plaque beside the bench. I tell them it was a gift. No one asks what it cost me to earn it. And I don't volunteer. You learn in time that some truths don't need to be spoken loudly to be known deeply, that silence can be power, that walking away is not weakness when every step is deliberate. I do miss parts of them, not the schemes, not the lies, just fragments. Brandon's laugh when he was 10, the way Harper used to hum while slicing peaches in the summer, the scent of cinnamon that always followed her into a room. But nostalgia is not a reason to return to pain. It's just memory with softer edges. My home now is quiet, but not empty. The foundation work fills my time. The garden finally has structure. Angela visits more often, and sometimes she brings women who need advice or comfort, or just someone to remind them they aren't invisible. I give them tea. I listen more than I speak. One woman, not long ago, held my hand and whispered, "You helped me leave a man who made me feel small." And in that moment, I knew. This wasn't just about property or names on paper or revenge measured by legal consequences. It was about breaking the cycle, refusing to pass down silence disguised as loyalty. I had nothing left to prove to Harper, or to Brandon, or to anyone who looked at my life and saw only the parts they wanted to claim. I had already won. And not because I walked away with more money, more power, or public sympathy. I won because I didn't become like them. I won because I found peace without permission. And that, to me, is the rarest inheritance of all. If you're still here with me, thank you for listening. Maybe my story reminded you of someone in your life. Maybe it reminded you of yourself. Betrayal hurts, but silence in the face of it hurts more. If you've ever been treated like a burden, like your years mean less than someone else's ambition, I hope you find the strength to rewrite the ending. You deserve peace, not pity, dignity, not scraps. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can say is nothing. Just walk, just live, and let them wonder where your strength came from.